Welcome to Aftermath.
Before we begin, we want to dedicate this podcast to the man who gave us our love for storytelling and, yes, even true crime, our dad.
It's been 18 years since he passed, but his legacy lives on in our shared love for classic crime shows. The ones we grew up on were Forensic Files, The Datelines, the ones that always tried to find a truth beyond the headlines.
We're here to carry on that tradition, but with a different focus, the enduring strength of those left behind.
So tonight, we begin with a case that spans 3 decades. The Grim Sleeper, a monster who preyed on the most vulnerable, and a case that exposed the deep rot of systemic neglect in a major American city.
The killer was Lonnie David Franklin Jr. On the surface, he was a retired LAPD garage mechanic, a former military serviceman, and by many accounts, an outgoing, doting family man.
This background provided him with a quiet, institutional camouflage, allowing his horrific crimes to hide in plain sight right in South Central Los Angeles.
First wave of homicides occurred intensely between 1985, when we were born, and 1988. The first confirmed victim linked to the pattern was Deborah Jackson. Shortly thereafter, there was Henrietta Wright, a mother of 5, was found under boxes in an alley who was sexually assaulted and murdered.
The pattern was immediate and chilling. Young Black women, often struggling with addiction or poverty, found shot, strangled, and then discarded in vulnerable locations, like back alleys and dumpsters near his home. We want to be clear. These women were individuals whose lives mattered long before they became a police file.
The absolute key to this case, however, is the only confirmed survivor, Anitra Margaret Washington. In November 1988, Washington, a 30-year-old mother of 2, accepted a ride from Franklin. He shot her point blank in the chest.
She passed out, but when she woke up, she realized Lonnie was on top of her, and he was taking pictures of her. She's the only one that we knew of at the time who lived to tell the tale, and her testimony was very critical.
She specifically recalls him taking a Polaroid photo of her as she was losing consciousness, a chilling piece of evidence that later found hidden in Franklin's garage.
The case earned its moniker, the Grim Sleeper, because after Washington's attack, the homicides abruptly seemed to stop. There was a shocking 14-year operational silence before the discovery of the next confirmed victim in 2002.
With Franklin's ability to so abruptly cease and then successfully restart his violent behavior demonstrates a calculated, controlled, and operational discipline. But in the decades of silence, in the sheer volume of victims, the lasting aftermath begins.
Part of our research for this case was to watch a couple documentaries, which will be linked at the bottom of the episode. And at this point, we want to share some of the additional information that we learned along the way. One of the most interesting things I found about Anitra is her story starts out a little differently in each documentary. She was approached by Franklin, who wanted to know where she was going that night as she ran across him in an orange Pinto, nonetheless. He asked her, and she responded to a party. He said, can he go too that night? And another note about that was that she actually told him no, which we didn't hear initially in the A&E, I think, documentary. It took about 2 to 3 articles later where we found a little bit more detail on her saying she felt bad for the guy, which is why she ultimately decided to go with him. So what she ended up doing was she said she was going to go back upstairs and get dressed for this party, just to provide additional color here. And when she got back into the car, they decided to run an errand, which she thought was a little strange because clearly it was not towards the party that she told him to go to. He went to somebody's house. He came back and she said that he was cold, chilling, and something must have changed. But then when he gets back into the car, he seems distant. He randomly calls her Brenda, and she decides this is her moment to get out that car. Because the one thing she does know is that something strange is happening and she doesn't want to be a part of it. So at that point, she attempts to leave his vehicle and he shoots her point blank in the chest with a 25 caliber gun. She doesn't initially even recognize that she was shot and felt a pressure, but was very stunned when she realized he said, "I shot you," and she kind of saw the gun. She passes out. And it is during that point that it goes back to where he was taking pictures of her. He then drags her out of the car and just leaves her. It is at that point where she wakes up and stumbles to her friend Linda's. She's trying to go to Linda's house to get some help. She stumbles on her way there. She said she left a trail of blood along the way. She gets to Linda's house. She kind of slumps over on the porch, and Linda's not home. Soon, thankfully, Linda and her husband drove up and they got her to the emergency room where she was in surgery for hours, but she survived. But the other thing was that the Grim Sleeper, as he was known, they said there was a 14-year gap. Tanisha, would you mind sharing what you learned in a documentary about this gap?
So pretty much in the documentary that I watched, that 14-year gap actually may have never actually happened. He just became more clever in hiding and disposing of the remains of his victims because he was a sanitation worker. So he had access to be able to dispose of anything he needs to without anyone ever getting a trace. Which is also disturbing because you can see how calculated he was, what was going on in his brain, what was happening in his mind, that no one else really seemed to know. Or if they did, they just turned their head because why else would you do that to somebody who seems on the outward loving, want to help his community? Because that was something that was also said heavily, that he was always helping or getting whatever someone needs. But yeah, for his 14 years, that's why they even say there's over 200 missing Black females, and about 100 of them seem to be the workings of a serial killer who would possibly be the Grim Sleeper.
Yeah, they actually found in his, and we'll get into more of that story shortly, but they actually found 180 women in his Polaroid collection in his garage. But it was interesting and kind of sad to hear how much attention this seemed to garner in the community. Again, remember this starts in the 80s. Around that time, we didn't have DNA. We didn't have a lot of the technology that we're super comfortable with now. But he managed to continue to do these crimes back to back almost for a while and then kind of disappear off the face of the earth when these happened. The police said that they did They looked for him during the A&E documentary. However, I think the one that you watched had some other follow-up that said maybe that wasn't exactly happening. So tell me, Tanisha, what else you learned?
What I will say, what I've learned. I mean, let's not discredit. Maybe there was maybe one or two police officer that probably was looking into the case and trying, but the information that was shared was that they could care less. They did not care. It was just one black woman or a prostitute off the street, one less one off the street, as they said it to one of the, I want to call her activists, um who,
Yeah, we're going to talk about her shortly.
yes, I want to say activists, that they pretty much blatantly just told them, y'all should be happy. They're prostitutes. We got one less off the street, and there was no concerning factor. Even as you look into the investigation, looking into the case, seeing that the first three victims were all connected and no one said anything. Even them believing, which I do, 'cause listening to the voice of Lonnie, and then hearing the voice of the call of the 911 call, he literally called and told on himself. But no one released that information because to them, what they're releasing it for. So it was very disturbing to know that back then, the life of a black woman was perceived to be a prostitute, an addict, and they don't matter. Which, not saying most of them were not. Most of his victims were either prostitutes or addicts in that same thing, but some of them weren't. So, that was disturbing in that regard.
Absolutely. The community was so upset at the lack of support that they received that they fought, and it was time for recognition.
In fact, the simple and painful truth is that the victims had a marginalized status. So that basically means that they were poor Black women, and due to that, their disappearances weren't treated as others. They were less likely to trigger sustained and high quality and high priority, actually, investigations from law enforcement, which was very clear in this case.
Certainly, the community stood up, and in 1985, activist and journalist Margaret Prescod founded the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Murders. Prescott and the coalition saw the pattern and took action before the police publicly even acknowledged a serial killer was operating.
Margaret really led the fight, or the recognition that these women deserved, as in seeing that there was a pattern that was happening that no one was talking about, no one could care, and she literally was putting the boot to the ground, so to speak, and handing out flyers, uh making it known, connecting the dots, and going to the police and trying to get them to understand what's happening, and seeing the connection that we're seeing. And pretty much the police wasn't outraged. They didn't care. So they pretty much would use a term called NHI, which is no human involved. And how can you say that? These are Black women. They're women. They're people. They were mothers. They were daughters. They were sisters. They were friends of people who were just getting killed. And that just shows how the systemic neglect is really there for us Black women. And the coalition really fought tirelessly to ensure the victims were not dehumanized.
In fact, Prescott's message was unwavering. She stated, please stop referring to these victims as prostitutes. They were women. They were mothers. They were loved by their families and their communities. And regardless of the fact of what their occupation may have been, they're still human.
That's right. Or whatever struggles they had as well. We know that many of them struggled with street life, whether that was prostitution or drugs. And that continuous pressure from the coalition kept the case alive. They kept the fires burning and forced the LAPD to reform a cold case task force in the 2000s, almost 20 years after the first case was reported. It was the community's persistence that finally met the breakthrough of technology that we talked about a little earlier.
Yeah, and the investigation came in 2010. That's crazy. 2010.
That's how long I
Um
know, right?
that's just ridiculous. With the authorization, the authorized use of the DNA search. So family DNA searches. So anybody that could be connected, that's in the system, right? And pretty much the detectives were alerted of a case where the crime scene DNA profile showed a partial match to a close relative. And you want to know who that was? Lonnie's son, Christopher Franklin, who was genetically profiled with was in the database because he had to for a 2008 arrest.
Crazy. Son also arrested.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And this was an indirect link. There actually was a direct link to Lonnie as well. And that came from an intensive undercover surveillance operation. So it seems the police were actually doing something at this point. But a detective posed as a busboy at a party Franklin attended and secured the definitive evidence, which was a discarded pizza crust,
Yeah. So now
which
I'm going to tell you a
ultimately,
little bit of the background on this because quite
yes.
a bit of documentaries gave us this was an interesting and
Yeah,
really like intensive situation
it
because they
was.
had been following him for at least 2 or 3 days hoping to get DNA. But for whatever reason they couldn't get it from his trash either, which was an interesting note because they had to make sure that it was from Franklin, Lonnie, not Chris the son. And so they followed him around until he went to a party at a pizza parlor. And then they were like, "Oh, thank God. Is he eating? Is he drinking?" And they found out that the man was. And that's when that detective went in as a busboy because they needed to make sure that the evidence was not contaminated. And that was kind of the undeniable match that led to his arrest, which was like a result of technology finally meeting the community's efforts. And it was really unique in that no one in his environment suspected him, right? This is one of the things that I found kind of jarring as someone who lives in a community, right? Is that there's this murderer living underfoot and you have no idea.
Well, not everybody knew, but some did. I'm going to say they suspected it. There's no way. There's no way. There's no, even like when we watch certain shows and they be like, well, you know what? There were signs. There were signs.
Yeah, there were
But
some signs. I mean,
but you try to act like you don't see it. So yes, to the community, that's what I was saying earlier. Through the community, he was like not the pillar of the community, but he was so helpful. He was employing people. He was doing things. He was helpful in that way. So of course, in your brain, you're like, you're not going to connect that. What when you find out? Even when he got arrested, they didn't even know what he got arrested for. They thought he got arrested for something else that he did that was helpful to the community.
you mean
Even
stealing
though that
cars?
was yeah, even though that really wasn't helpful. But you know what I'm saying? But I mean, to
Well, I
someone who
would
needs one.
argue that it was a little helpful because remember, like you said, he was the go-to person
Mm-hmm.
in the community for all the things. And one of the things we didn't quite touch on is that he was the go-to for any car part that you needed, any
That's true.
TV that you needed. He was
Mm-hmm.
the hookup for the entire community. And in one of the articles I read, this lady had broke off her mirror on her vehicle and she immediately went to Lonnie. Like it was just, I know he has a mirror somewhere. And then later on in another documentary, I heard that like he just knew he wasn't the one necessarily to quote unquote steal cars, but he could
Mm-hmm.
get stolen
He can
car
get you
parts.
he can get you some. So yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things. And I think even too in the documentary they was even saying, yes, they got the pizza crust, but also we're gonna get into it when we talk about like when they went to trial. His lawyer, I don't know about his lawyer, but they also had like a cup, so it was like they needed to make sure they had undenying DNA that this was you. And we'll talk more about where he left his DNA, because that's even more crazy. Just saying.
Yeah, it is. But even more so when you think about the fact they had to go on this massive hunt, considering that he had been convicted of 15 felonies. So I thought it was interesting that his son's genetic profile was in a state database and his was not, considering that some of his crimes were more serious, including battery and including false imprisonment. I'm like, these are kind of cases that you would think, why is there not a profile for him somewhere saved? But there wasn't, which is kind of even the more shocking and terrifying thing. But nonetheless, he was clearly arrested. So what happened at trial, Tanisha?
So in 2016, when he went to trial, he was convicted of 10 counts of murder. The 10 cases, there's still 10 cases pending.
At that time,
right? But for the families, the court's decision was only the end of the legal battle. It was not the end of the grief.
Absolutely not. You have to think about the fact that this case has been going on almost 30 years at this point, right? You have all these families without answers for decades. You know what I mean? For decades and it's just insanity to consider how many groups of years have gone by that these people have no closure. But nonetheless, Porter Alexander, the father of Monique Alexander, spoke at the sentencing, and he said that it felt like Franklin had taken a limb from me. They had lost essential parts of their family. And let me give you the exact quote. He took a limb from me, and every time I look, she's missing and can never be replaced. I don't care how many pictures I have on the wall or the things I see around me. It doesn't bring her back. And that's a fact, period.
In fact, his testimony truly captures the heart of the aftermath. The justice in court cannot bring anyone back. A loved one is a loved one, and the pain is permanent. And that's something we want to outline here as well.
For sure. And then there was his youngest victim that we know of, Princess
Bartholomew.
Thank you. Who was just 15. And she was strangled and beaten back in 2002. Her foster sister, Samara Herald, spoke of Princess' stolen future.
Evelyn, you gonna give us her quote?
Of course. I'll never get my sister back. She'll never get a chance to grow up. She'll never go to college. She'll never be married. She'll never have the choice to make better choices, which is something we all want.
I'm about to cry up on this thing because I don't know what I would do if I lost y'all.
Right.
Like,
That's
as
the tragic.
sisters, you know?
That's the tragedy of all of this, is that no matter what they were doing at the time, they still had the opportunity to make different choices. And so did he,
Sure.
for that matter. So did he.
Definitely.
But anyway, the tragedy only deepens when we consider the full scope of Franklin's activities. When police searched his house, they found a stash of photos, including one of Nitria Washington, which we talked about a little earlier. In total, there were over 1,000 photos of women and teenage girls. And like I said, 180 women were never identified. So we don't even quite know what his victim count is. And I want to point this out. He did not give any reason why this happened during his arrest or at trial. He was silent the entire time, which is another way to rob what I feel the victims of peace and closure. There's never going to be a reason, maybe, that you can deal with, but to not even get a sense to understand why, I think that's where the documentaries have come in, to give us a sense of his mind frame and the people around him, and then learning that he just had this predisposition to hate addicts at all. period, and then seemed to feel that he was almost justified in taking them off the streets, which again, everyone has the opportunity to make different choices. So by robbing them of their future, he ultimately ended up robbing him of his own as well.
And his hatred for these women were very real. Was very, very real. And you could tell that in the types of pictures that he took of them. Many of these women were unconscious or partially nude. And despite public efforts to identify them, a number of these victims we still don't know.
That's almost over 100 people that we
Yes.
don't know what happened to them.
I definitely want to touch on real quick about the one of the documentaries that we watched. Towards the end, one of the people that he was encountering, her name is Pam, she was actually helping track down each person that was in this lineup that the police had made of all the Polaroids. And towards the end, you at least get to meet about 5 of them. And, they was pretty much saying, how they met him, why they met him, what was going on. And most of them were addicts. Some of them weren't, but most of them were. And he used that to exploit to get them to come with him by saying, hey, I can give you some of this and give you some money so you can get some more when you're done. And, just seeing even like the latest one who was like, she said, I met him in about 2006. It was just like, wow, like that's recent. But the beauty thing about it, they seem like they got clean and all these different things, but no one should ever have to go through that. Right. And knowing that some of these victims will never get to see their families again. These were the ones who actually did get away in some way or another, right? Because they're still here. But the other families won't just get their closure and they still won't understand the truth. They can look at documentaries like us to try to figure it out, but it never helps if you can't just know, why did you pick mine? What was the reason that you felt that you had to end their life and just not, leave them alone?
And that brings us to our next point. The case of the Grim Sleeper is not just a story of a serial killer. It is a story of how a city allowed a tragedy to unfold and how a community led by women like Margaret Prescod refused to let their sisters be forgotten, which we appreciate.
100%. Terrible things happen for no reason at all. But the strength and love demonstrated in the aftermath, the families who fought for answers, the survivors who spoke, the activists who demanded justice, tell us the reason we tell this story is that it is the story our father would have wanted us to tell. He would have loved for us to uncover the real story behind the story, the people who were impacted, the way the community came together, and ultimately that there was some good found, even in the saddest situation.
So, I just want to bring this point, and this is just another truth that we live in a country or cities that do not value us Black women and is willing to turn their eye. And if it's not for Margaret or other activists out here who is always making it a thing to let them know that we all have a voice. We're all people, we all matter, we all care. And we shouldn't just be turned away just because of the color of our skin. Or because we may have a little issues we're working through, right? It just brings that back to, we all have to fight. No one's better than anyone. And they should be ashamed. People should be ashamed to not consider everyone's lives, because if they mattered, maybe, just maybe, he would have stopped at one. Or just maybe he would never got to any if he actually had stayed in jail was in jail when he had all these uh
Previous charges.
convictions,
Yeah.
all these charges. It's not funny, but when you think about it, like, he literally had felonies and he was still outside. Like, we didn't hear nothing about him ever being in jail, but maybe once or twice. And then he
Yeah,
wasn't even in
despite,
there that
yeah.
long. Yeah, and he wasn't even in there that long.
He got
So
released
it's
for good behavior only to be out on the street and commit more heinous crimes than what he was certainly charged with.
and I think the kicker on it is it seemed like he also was trying to tell on himself repeatedly.
Yes.
And no one you know what it seemed like? He was trying to cry out for help, but
And
no
no
one
one was
answered.
listening. Yeah.
So, with that, we would love to hear your thoughts on our first episode of Aftermath. And, we love honoring our dad's love of true crime by telling these stories with compassion.
Do you think that we achieved that? Let us know.
And tell us if you would be interested in more episodes that examine the long-term impact on crime on communities, not just people. You can find us on our social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Threads, on YouTube, and on our website at maineventmamaspodcast.com, where you can send us messages. You can leave us a voicemail to tell us what you thought and if you want more. And where can they listen to our other podcasts?
So you can definitely hear this episode and our other episodes on iHeartRadio, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, on Amazon Audible, on Pocket Podcasts, and Spotify.
That's right. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us for Aftermath.